The living room smelled of pine and cinnamon. My daughter had insisted on baking gingerbread earlier, and the air still carried that warm sweetness. The Christmas tree glowed softly in the corner, its lights blinking in rhythm like a quiet heartbeat against the stillness of the night. For once, the house felt safe, wrapped in holiday calm. And then, at 11:58 p.m., the sound of a single email ping cut through the silence. I opened my laptop, expecting maybe a late holiday greeting or an automatic reminder. Instead, bold black letters filled the screen termination notice for a moment. I couldn't breathe. My fingers hovered above the keyboard as if the words might vanish if I didn't touch them. But they didn't. They stared back, cold and absolute. Shock is too small a word for what spread through me. It wasn't just the cruelty of the timing, it was the precision. 2 minutes before midnight on Christmas Eve. 2 minutes before the day I had promised my daughter would be ours. Uninterrupted. My body froze. Every muscle locked as though the email had turned me into stone. Now, I want to know where you are listening from. And while you are listening to this story, breathe deeply and feel your heartbeat. If this kind of story resonates with you, please like and subscribe. We would appreciate it. Now, back to that Christmas night. Then I noticed something odd. The email wasn't only addressed to me. The HR director had CC'd half a dozen names I recognized from our international compliance list. Partners in Frankfurt, a contact in Dubai, a legal liaison in Singapore. My pulse stumbled. This wasn't just an internal memo. They had accidentally opened a door I'd never dared touch. The tree lights flickered against the dark window, reflecting me back like a stranger. I walked toward the glass and pulled aside the curtain. Outside, the neighborhood glowed with warmth, families laughing, children darting between doorways, music spilling faintly from one house to the next. It was Christmas everywhere but here. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, feeling the divide between their joy and my isolation. I couldn't cry. I couldn't even think. The only sound in the room was the steady hum of the heater and the echo of those 3 words repeating in my head: termination, notice, effective. I was still standing there when the clock struck midnight. The email sat open on my screen, its words pulsing in my head like a siren I couldn't shut off. I wanted to slam the laptop shut, to pretend it wasn't there, but the glow of the monitor felt like it was burning a hole through the quiet of my living room. My eyes skimmed the message again. Slower this time. And that was when I saw it, one vague line, buried in the middle: failure to fulfill obligations. Obligations after 18 years. It was so deliberately undefined, it could mean anything or nothing at all. My stomach twisted, knowing it was written that way on purpose. For a moment, I thought about calling someone, maybe a colleague or even HR, to demand an explanation. But my hand froze on the phone, across the hall. The soft hum of my daughter's sound machine carried through the silence. She was asleep, safe in her room, waiting for Christmas morning. I had promised her this year would be different. I had promised her I wouldn't miss it. That memory cut sharper than the email itself. 2 weeks earlier, she had looked at me across the kitchen table with a seriousness that didn't belong to a teenager. "Mom, you'll be here this time, right? You won't go to the office." Her voice was quiet but edged with the disappointment of too many holidays, interrupted by ringing phones and emergency logins. I had put my hand over hers and sworn, "Yes, this year I'll be here. I promise." Now, sitting in the glow of the tree, I felt the weight of that promise pressing down on me. My instincts screamed to react, to fight back, to march into the digital battlefield they had created with that one cold email. But another part of me knew that doing so would steal the very morning I had vowed to protect. The conflict gnawed at me. If I stayed silent, was I letting them win if I fought back? Was I betraying my daughter again? The thought of her face in the morning, excited, hopeful, waiting by the tree, was the only thing holding me together. I closed my eyes and pictured her stocking hanging from the mantel, the one she decorated herself with crooked felt stars. That was the world I needed to preserve, at least for a few more hours. Still, the phrase failure to fulfill obligations looped in my mind. What obligations to work until my bones broke, to give up every sacred moment of my personal life for their bottom line? It wasn't a reason, it was a weapon, a blunt instrument disguised as professional language. I could almost hear the smug laughter in the boardroom where the wording had been approved. I pushed the laptop away, the edge scraping against the coffee table. The tree lights blinked once, twice, like a quiet reminder that time was still moving forward. Midnight had already passed. It was officially Christmas Day, and instead of wrapping one last gift or placing cookies on a plate, I was staring down the end of my career. But even in the numbness, there was a spark of resolve. They had chosen their timing to humiliate me, to strip me of dignity in the loneliest minute of the year. Yet I still had one choice left: silence. Not cowardice, not surrender, but silence as a shield. For her, for the morning, I refused to let them ruin. I rose from the couch, closing the curtain over the window where the laughter of neighbors still spilled into the night. Let them have their joy. Mine was sleeping in the next room, and she deserved to wake up to a mother who kept her word. Whatever storm was gathering outside could wait. I whispered into the stillness, almost as if saying it aloud could lock the vow into place. I will not let them take this from us. I sat back on the couch, breathing slower now, forcing myself to loosen the knot that had taken hold in my chest. The first wave of shock had passed, leaving behind something sharper but steadier. Rage wanted to push through. Panic begged to take over. But I kept both at bay. Years inside that company had taught me one thing: the people who lasted weren't the loudest or the strongest. They were the ones who could stay calm when everything collapsed. As I stared at the closed laptop, a memory stirred, one I hadn't thought about in years. The compliance mirror system. I had built it almost by accident. Back when we were preparing for a high-stakes audit 5 years ago, everyone was scrambling, terrified of mistakes that could cost millions. And I decided we needed a way to monitor HR actions across time zones in real time. The system mirrored every termination, every suspension, every change in personnel records, and flagged them against international labor codes. I'd sold it to the executives as an extra safety net, a way to keep partners reassured. In truth, it was my shield. The CEO had mocked me at the time. "Denise," he'd said, waving his hand as though brushing off a child's drawing. "This is your paranoia project. No one will ever look at it." He laughed in front of the board, making a joke at my expense, and I remember sitting there in silence, my cheeks burning, while they moved on to the next topic. But I had kept it, quietly, patiently, and tonight. It was awake, because when that email arrived at 11:58 p.m., the system had treated it like any other termination. It didn't matter that it was meant to humiliate me, or that it came in the dead of night on Christmas Eve. To the code I had written, it was simply data, and data triggered consequences. Right now. As I sat in my living room with the tree glowing behind me, mirrored copies of that email had already traveled farther than the executives could imagine. A server in Frankfurt had flagged it under European holiday protections. A hub in Singapore had tagged it for religious observance interference. And Dubai, well, Dubai didn't tolerate corporate cruelty disguised as policy. I could almost see the chain reaction spreading like ripples across a frozen pond. Each alert a crack running deeper and wider, for the first time in hours. I felt steady. They thought they had cornered me with one cold message. They didn't know they had pulled the lever on a system designed to expose them. I leaned back into the couch and let the quiet hum of the heater steady me. Control didn't mean striking back tonight. Control meant letting the architecture I'd put in place years ago do exactly what it was built for. I thought of the CEO's mocking voice again, calling it a useless obsession, a waste of time. How small that moment seemed now, compared to the silence that would greet him when phones started ringing from overseas. His arrogance had blinded him to the fact that rules are not just words on paper, they are weapons in the right hands. My hands. The tree lights blinked once, twice, casting a calm rhythm across the room. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Let it run." And with that, I finally felt something close to peace. The room had finally grown quiet, the glow of the Christmas tree casting long, steady shadows across the floor. I thought the night might let me rest in silence, that maybe I could sink into the fragile peace I'd carved for myself after remembering the system I had built. But at 12:03 a.m., my phone buzzed, shattering the stillness. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. Ingrid Mueller. Berlin. My breath caught. Ingrid wasn't just an old colleague. She was one of the toughest compliance auditors I had ever worked with. If she was awake at this hour, it wasn't for pleasantries. I swiped the screen with trembling fingers. The message was short. Urgent, Denise. They fired you on Christmas Eve. I've escalated to the consortium. I stared at the words, my heart thudding in my chest. For a moment, I wondered if I was dreaming. Escalated already. The system had done its work, but I hadn't expected anyone to act so quickly, let alone Ingrid. Then, before I could even form a reply, another notification appeared. This one from an unfamiliar number with a Singapore prefix. A single-line, red flag contract copy received. Reviewing now. I blinked, confused. How had a lawyer in Singapore stumbled onto this already? It took me a beat to realize the truth, because my system didn't just flag terminations, it mirrored associated documents. The termination notice had dragged the pending billion-dollar contract into its web, stamping it with a red flag. And some unlucky or lucky lawyer, working late on the other side of the world, had seen it pop up. I pressed a hand against my mouth, half in disbelief, half in awe. This wasn't me pulling strings. This was the architecture I had quietly nurtured for years, moving faster than I could keep up with. But with that awe came hesitation. My phone buzzed again. Ingrid this time calling directly. I let it ring once, twice, then stopped myself from answering. 100 questions pressed against my ribs. Should I confirm the details? Should I tell her what I know? Or let the system speak for itself if I said too much? I risked exposing myself as the origin point. If I said too little, would they lose faith? Thinking it was all some error, I hovered. Finger over the green button, torn. My daughter's room was just down the hall. I could almost hear her breathing in her sleep. A reminder of the promise I had made. If I got pulled too deep tonight, the morning she deserved might slip away. I let the call fade into silence, the unanswered ring echoing in the back of my mind. My thumb itched to type, to say something, anything. I opened a draft and wrote a single word, confirmed. Then I deleted it. I typed again, yes. I was terminated at 11:58 p.m. Deleted. The cursor blinked back at me. Patient. Unforgiving. The tree lights blinked too, as though reminding me of the balance I had to keep. I closed the phone and set it face down on the table. My silence was not weakness. It was strategy. They already had what they needed. The system was feeding them more than I could in a dozen phone calls. Still, beneath the caution, a strange warmth flickered through me hope, for the first time since the email. I wasn't completely alone. Somewhere across the world, Ingrid was fighting, a lawyer in Singapore was reading, and the gears of accountability were already turning. I leaned back into the couch, eyes closed, letting that fragile hope settle in my chest. I whispered to the quiet room, let them run with it, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself a faint smile. What about you? Do you trust Denise to hold her ground? To stay in control when the pressure builds? Stick with me until the end of this story, because the way it unfolds might surprise you more than you think. I thought the night had finally reached its peak. Messages from Berlin, a red flag in Singapore, and my own silence pressed like a weight on my chest. But at 12:41 a.m., another notification slid across my phone. This one from an address I hadn't seen in months. It was from Michael Tran, an old compliance ally who had left the company last year after a bitter fight with the legal department. The subject line froze me, Section 14B. My thumb trembled as I opened it. Attached was a single PDF scan. grainy but legible, stamped and dated 3 years ago. I recognized the document instantly, our International Ethics Charter. And there, highlighted in yellow, was the clause I had fought for back then. No termination of senior staff during nationally or religiously observed holidays. My pulse raced. Section 14B, the very safeguard I had insisted we include, the one that nearly cost me my job at the time. I remembered the meetings vividly, lawyers around a table, their voices rising, some calling it unnecessary, others warning it could expose the company to unrealistic liabilities. The CEO himself had leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Delete it," he'd said flatly. "This isn't a charity, it's a corporation." But the deletion never became official. The paperwork had sat unsigned, gathering dust in a drawer, and now, here it was again, glowing on my phone. Undeniable. I scrolled down to Michael's message. It was brief, almost clinical. They never signed the revised version. 14B still stands. Use it. My breath caught. Could it really be this simple? Could one overlooked signature, one forgotten form, carry the power to dismantle what they had just done to me? The suspense pulled me taut. Every nerve in my body felt stretched between two poles, disbelief and possibility. My mind raced back to the endless arguments I'd endured. The eye rolls, the sarcasm. I could still hear the head of legal snapping. We're wasting time. Holidays are not compliance risks. Yet here was the proof. Alive. Undeniable. Preserved in ink. The irony almost made me laugh. They had mocked me for being paranoid, for fussing over details no one cared about. But now those very details had teeth. And still, a question gnawed at me. Should I forward it? Should I throw this evidence into the storm already unfolding overseas? Or should I hold it back? Wait. Let the weight of suspense build until the morning. My finger hovered over the forward button. The contact list ready. But hesitation gripped me. Sending it might reveal I had kept a copy, that I had anticipated this exact cruelty. If they traced it back to me, would they twist it into another accusation? I could already imagine their spin, Denise manipulating old documents for revenge. I set the phone down, heart pounding. The tree lights blinked softly beside me, a contrast to the storm raging in my head. Across the ocean, lawyers and auditors were already circling like hawks. Did they need me to push the proof? Or would the system carry it forward on its own? A soft vibration buzzed again, this time, another note from Ingrid. We found the clause. Verification in progress. My chest tightened. They already had it. The mirror system had done its work. Digging through the archives, dragging Section 14B back into the light. My silence hadn't stalled them at all. Relief and tension collided inside me. I didn't need to act. The evidence was already alive, already working against the people who thought they could erase me at the stroke of midnight. I leaned back, closing my eyes, whispering into the quiet, "You wanted it gone. You left it unfinished. Now it will finish you." The suspense still coiled in my veins. But beneath it, for the first time, a thin thread of certainty began to form. The minutes after Ingrid's last message stretched into eternity. My living room was silent, except for the soft hum of the heater. But my phone felt like a live wire in my hand. I kept waiting for it to stop, for the storm to calm. But instead, the current grew stronger. At 1:15 a.m., the call came, the one I hadn't dared to imagine. The number was unfamiliar, but the country code made my pulse skip the Middle East. I swallowed hard and answered, my voice steadier than I felt. "Ms. Scott," a man said. His tone clipped and furious. "We've received confirmation of your termination. On Christmas Eve." He paused as though struggling to believe it himself. "Effective immediately. Our board has voted to suspend all negotiations. The agreement is on hold." For a heartbeat, I couldn't speak. Suspended. The word rang in my ears like a verdict. After 18 years of giving everything, they had stripped me bare in an instant, but now it was costing them. A sharp satisfaction rushed through me. Almost sweet. They thought I was disposable. They thought no one would notice. Yet here was a powerful voice from halfway across the world, slamming the brakes on their billion-dollar dream. I forced myself to respond with calm, careful words. "I understand," I said quietly. "Thank you for letting me know." My hands shook after I hung up, but not from fear alone. There was a deep, undeniable relief in hearing someone else call out their cruelty for what it was. I leaned back against the couch, exhaling for what felt like the first time all night. And then, another vibration buzzed through my phone, not a call, but a screenshot forwarded from a colleague still inside the company. It was a group chat. The CEO himself had typed, "Just minutes earlier, relax. Nobody will notice at this hour." I stared at the words, equal parts disgusted and amused. He thought midnight would bury me quietly, that no one would ever see the knife he'd twisted. He had no idea the mirror system had already carried his arrogance across borders. And then, as if the universe wanted to underline the irony, my phone buzzed again. This time the call was from Tokyo. The contact flashed Consortium Office, Japan. The timing was poetic. He had said nobody will notice. And now, barely 5 minutes later, the phones in his office must have been shrieking with calls from every time zone he had ignored. I imagined him, sitting smugly in his chair, maybe sipping something expensive, watching the clock inch toward dawn. And then the ringing started. One call, then two, then five, until the facade cracked. I could almost see the panic spreading across his face as he realized what nobody will notice had turned into. For a moment, I laughed, quietly, the sound almost foreign in the heavy night, but it was laughter edged with fear, because I knew this wasn't just victory, it was dangerous. When men like him feel power slipping, they lash out, and I had just become the symbol of their unraveling. That's when the message came from a friend still in the office, the one person I trusted to tell me the truth. It wasn't a warning. Not exactly, it was a revelation. The secretary recorded it. She wrote, the call, the chat, everything. He said nobody will notice, and she hit record. My throat tightened. Evidence. Actual proof that the CEO had dismissed the risk. That he had knowingly humiliated me, knowing it could breach contracts. It wasn't just rumor or system data now. It was his voice, captured and preserved. Relief surged again, hot and sharp. But so did a deeper fear. If that recording surfaced, it would gut him in front of the board. But would they come after me harder? Blaming me for everything, would they paint me as the orchestrator? The one who set the trap? I stood up, pacing the length of the living room, the tree lights flickering against the glass window. Satisfaction and dread twisted together inside me. A storm I couldn't separate. They were bleeding now, and I had the proof to let them keep bleeding. But every move forward carried risk for me. For my daughter asleep down the hall. For the fragile promise I was clinging to. I pressed the phone against my chest, closing my eyes, whispering into the silence, let it unfold. Let them choke on their own arrogance. And for a fleeting moment, I felt the dangerous thrill of control, sweet, terrifying, and absolute. The house was still, wrapped in the fragile silence of early morning. The glow from the tree had dimmed to a soft shimmer. And the laptop sat closed on the coffee table, its black screen reflecting only my tired face. I thought the storm outside might quiet for a while, but the storm inside me was harder to silence. I hadn't noticed how long I'd been sitting there, staring into nothing, until I heard the soft creak of her bedroom door. Mom. Her voice was sleepy, small, yet it carried straight through me like a blade. My daughter stood in the hallway, rubbing her eyes, her pajama sleeves pulled down over her hands. She looked younger in that moment, like the little girl who used to climb into my lap to watch the tree lights. She walked closer, frowning when she saw me hunched in the living room. "Why are you still up?" I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I wanted to tell her the truth, to pour out all the anger and betrayal burning inside me. But what came out instead was softer, steadier, because I promised you I'd be here. Her expression softened, but the confusion remained. She sat down beside me on the couch, her head leaning against my shoulder. I could feel the warmth of her hair, the fragile weight of her trust. Pride swelled in my chest. I had kept my word. I hadn't left. I hadn't chosen them over her. Yet underneath the pride came the sharp sting of guilt. She could see the exhaustion in my eyes, the way my hands still trembled. Keeping the promise had cost me more than I wanted her to know. I brushed her hair back gently. "Go back to bed, sweetheart. Tomorrow's a big morning." She hesitated, then nodded, pressing closer before standing and walking back toward her room. I watched her go, torn between relief and regret. She deserved a mother fully present, not a shadow fighting invisible battles in the middle of the night. The phone buzzed again, just as her door clicked shut. I grabbed it quickly, hoping she hadn't heard. The message was from a young colleague, Eli, one of the newest hires, barely in his 20s. His words glowed on the screen. "They pressured me to take your role tonight. I told them no." I stared, stunned, for someone so young, so precariously balanced at the start of his career. That choice carried weight. Loyalty like that was rare, especially in a company that thrived on fear and obedience. I felt a surge of gratitude, tempered with sorrow. He shouldn't have been put in that position at all. I typed back quickly, "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." His reply came almost instantly. "I know, but I couldn't let them erase you like that. It's wrong." I set the phone down, emotions twisting inside me. His refusal was a small act in the grand scheme, but to me it felt monumental. Proof that not everyone was willing to play along with cruelty. Proof that even in the darkest corners of corporate arrogance, there were still sparks of integrity. Yet the guilt pressed harder. My daughter had seen me at my weakest, caught in the act of keeping a promise while unraveling in silence. She would remember the sight of her mother hunched over, face shadowed, fighting battles she couldn't understand. Pride and regret braided together in my chest. Inseparable. I looked toward her door, whispered words she couldn't hear. "I'll make this count. I'll make sure it was worth it." The tree lights blinked faintly, casting small stars of color across the floor. The night wasn't over, and I knew the storm outside would only grow louder. But in that moment, sandwiched between my daughter's trust and Eli's quiet defiance, I felt something stronger than exhaustion. Not victory, not yet, but a resolve that was equal parts heavy and unshakable. I straightened in my seat, eyes fixed on the dark laptop screen. Tomorrow, the world would see what they had done. Tonight, I would carry both the pride of a promise kept and the weight of the guilt it cost me. And in the stillness, I told myself both were fuel. By the time the first sliver of dawn pressed through the blinds, my body felt like it had been carved out of stone. I hadn't slept. I had barely moved. The tree still glowed faintly in the corner, but its light felt different now, less festive, more like a silent witness to the unraveling that had begun in the dark. At 6:00 a.m., my phone buzzed again, this time with a forwarded screenshot from a colleague who still had eyes inside the company. It was a string of frantic messages from the executive group chat. The CEO's name popped up again and again, tagged and called out by subordinates. Zurich had called, Tokyo had called, and neither call had been good. My chest tightened as I read the lines. Zurich Consortium demands explanation. Tokyo asking for immediate statement. This isn't going away. The words leapt off the screen like flames. I could almost hear the chaos echoing down sterile hallways I knew too well. The boardroom humming with phones ringing off the hook. The satisfaction was there. Of course, I'd be lying if I said otherwise. But layered over it was something else, a taut, unrelenting tension that refused to ease. Because this wasn't just an external storm, it was turning inward. And then came the message that nearly stopped my breath. Bank of Geneva has frozen our operational account pending review. Ethical breach flagged. I blinked, reading it twice to make sure my tired eyes weren't playing tricks. Frozen. Not reduced. Not delayed. Frozen. The very arteries of the company, choked off by a single decision to humiliate me at 11:58 p.m. I leaned forward, pressing the phone against my knee, letting the weight of it sink in. This wasn't a ripple anymore. This was a dam breaking. A billion-dollar corporation was suddenly cash-starved because one CEO thought he could silence me with a keystroke. But the tension didn't fade into triumph. If anything, it sharpened, because I knew how they would respond. When backed into a corner, they'd look for someone to blame. And right now, blame was tearing them apart from the inside. The updates came in quick succession. HR accusing the CEO of reckless timing. The CEO firing back that HR had drafted the termination email without his oversight. Legal chiming in. Furious that the holiday clause had ever been left in the archives, it was chaos disguised as professionalism. Each department scrambling to rewrite history before the partners finished rewriting the deal. I imagined the CEO pacing the floor of his office, red-faced, barking into one phone while another rang unanswered. He would be demanding explanations, shouting for names, and all the while Zurich and Tokyo were stacking more pressure onto his shoulders. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of waiting for the next call to come, the next collapse to hit. The mirror system had already set everything in motion. Now, I had nothing to do but watch as the dominoes fell. And yet the watching was its own torment. Each buzz of my phone carried the weight of another blow. Another fracture inside the company I had once bled for. I stood and paced the living room, glancing toward my daughter's closed door. She was still asleep, untouched by the storm outside. And I silently begged the morning to give her a few more hours of peace. My promise to her had kept me grounded. But now that very promise made the waiting harder. I was holding two worlds in my hands, the quiet of home and the chaos abroad, and the collision felt inevitable. I returned to the couch, gripping the phone tightly. Another screenshot appeared. This one from an HR manager I barely knew if he thinks we're taking the fall for this. He's insane. I exhaled slowly, every nerve taut, knowing the fractures inside would only widen. The dam had broken, the flood had begun, but the full collapse was still ahead. All I could do was wait, and waiting had never felt this heavy. By mid-morning, the weight of sleepless hours pressed heavy on my shoulders. But my mind was strangely clear. The storm had shifted away from me and was crashing directly into the boardroom I had once walked through so many times. I wasn't there to see it, but the fragments that reached me told a story sharper than any memory. The CEO arrived just after 9, his face pale and jaw tight, storming into the executive meeting room. On the table before him lay a corporate-issued phone, its screen lit with a number impossible to ignore. 79 missed calls. 79. Each one a demand, a reprimand, a warning from investors and partners scattered across time zones. The arrogance of last night had evaporated. What remained was a man cornered by the very silence he had counted on. Inside the company group chat, the updates flew like sparks from a burning fuse. He's shouting at Zurich. Tokyo is threatening withdrawal. He doesn't know what to say. I read each line in quiet detachment, seated on my couch, the Christmas tree still glowing faintly beside me. I didn't need to be in the room to feel its temperature. The panic radiated outward, reaching me even here. And then came the moment that sealed it. A colleague messaged me directly. Almost in disbelief, fax from Dubai, just landed in the boardroom, contract terminated. I closed my eyes, picturing it, a sheet of paper rolling slowly out of the machine, its words black and final, no negotiation, no hesitation, a single phrase undoing months of posturing and late-night calls. Contract terminated. My chest rose and fell slowly. There was no rush of triumph, no celebration, only calm, like standing on a cliff and watching the waves pound below. The storm was theirs now. Mine was silence. But inside that boardroom, the calm I carried did not exist. The council of directors turned on him, voices raised, questions sharp. The loudest among them pointed straight at the clause they had thought buried years ago, Section 14B. Why wasn't it removed, one demanded. We agreed this risk was unacceptable. Another chimed in, voice hot with anger. You assured us the revisions were complete. Why is 14B still binding? He stammered. Defensive. Trying to pin the failure on the legal team, on HR, on anyone but himself. But the truth clung to him like smoke. He had mocked the clause, dismissed it, and never bothered to sign the revision that would have erased it. I could almost hear the panic in his tone, the rasp in his voice as he scrambled to explain the inexplicable. And all the while, the facts from Dubai sat there in the center of the table like a final nail. A small part of me ached, remembering the years I had spent in those very rooms, watching the same faces now twisted with rage. They had sat silent when he mocked me, complicit when they cut corners, indifferent when they chipped away at loyalty. Now, they were finally seeing the cost of silence. My phone buzzed again, with another update board demanding immediate answers. He's unraveling. I leaned back into the couch, exhaling slowly. Around me, the house was quiet, my daughter still asleep down the hall. Outside, children played in the snow, laughter faint through the window. My world was steady, even as theirs collapsed, for 18 years. I had given them everything, and now, without lifting a hand, I was watching their empire fracture from the inside. They had chosen humiliation at 11:58 p.m. By 9:30 a.m., humiliation belonged to them. By late morning, the company tried to claw back control of the narrative. I watched it unfold, not from a conference room or an executive call, but from my living room couch, coffee gone cold in my hands. Their official statement hit the wires around 11 o'clock a.m. due to technical complications affecting scheduled transactions. Negotiations with our international partners have been temporarily paused. Technical complications. I almost laughed when I read it. They had reduced the avalanche of consequences, the frozen bank accounts, the furious investors. The clause they had ignored into two sterile words meant to lull shareholders back to sleep. Technical complications. As if it had been a broken printer or a faulty server instead of their arrogance laid bare. The bitterness sat heavy in my chest. But not toward the lie. I had expected that. No. The sting came from how familiar it felt. For years, I had been their translator of truth into palatable half-truths. I had been the one smoothing over disasters with careful wording, bending reality just enough to keep the facade alive. Seeing them do it without me now felt like watching someone wear my skin. I closed the press release and set my phone down. Staring at the Christmas tree, still blinking quietly in the corner, my daughter had wandered into the kitchen, humming as she poured cereal, blissfully unaware of the storm I was watching through glass. I was grateful for her ignorance, but inside, I was boiling. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. By 11:30 a.m., investigative reporters had already started digging. Screenshots flew across my phone, emails being leaked, employees whispering to journalists they trusted, and then, like a match catching on dry wood, the truth flared. My termination notice. One of the financial blogs published it first, the timestamp, 11:58 p.m. The subject line, termination notice effective. Immediately, the article called it cold-blooded, the kind of maneuver that eroded faith in leadership. Larger outlets followed within the hour, each headline sharper than the last. And then came the call. My phone rang with an unfamiliar number, local area code. I hesitated before answering, expecting maybe a telemarketer or a stray wrong number. But the voice was crisp, professional, unmistakably a journalist. Mrs. Scott, this is Carolyn Hayes with the Chronicle. We've confirmed a termination email sent to you just before midnight on Christmas Eve. Can you confirm this was real? Did they actually fire you on the holiday itself? Her question sliced straight through me. The bitterness turned acidic. They had tried to bury me in silence, tried to strip me down in the most humiliating way possible. And now their cruelty was headline material. I drew a breath, steadying myself. Yes, I said finally. My voice surprised me with how calm it sounded. It's real. They fired me at 11:58 p.m. Christmas Eve. There was a pause on the other end, the kind of silence where I knew she was writing every word. Then, would you be willing to speak further on the record? I hesitated. Every instinct screamed caution. Anything I said could become ammunition, could drag me deeper into the fire. But another part of me, the part that had been silenced for too long, burned to be heard. I can't give you more right now, I said at last. But you already have the truth. They made their choice. Now everyone else can see it. When I hung up, the weight of it settled over me. My words were out in the world now, beyond recall. The irony was brutal for 18 years. They had relied on me to protect their reputation, and in less than 18 hours, my silence and one simple confirmation had done more damage than any mistake they ever blamed me for. I sat back on the couch, staring at the quiet lights of the tree. My daughter called from the kitchen, asking if we could bake cookies later. I told her yes, my voice steady even as my chest ached. Yes, we would bake cookies. And meanwhile, the company that thought it could erase me with a midnight email was choking on its own lies. Technical complications. Indeed, the morning light finally broke through the blinds, warm and golden, spilling across the living room like a balm, for the first time all night. The world outside felt calm. The storm of emails and phone calls still raged somewhere across continents. But here, in this room, it was Christmas morning. I sat cross-legged on the rug beside my daughter, the tree glowing above us, its ornaments catching the sun. She tore the paper from her first gift, laughter spilling out as she lifted a sweater we had picked together weeks ago. Her joy was unfiltered, pure. And for a moment, I let myself breathe it in. 18 years of service, erased with a single email. But right now, none of that mattered. I was here. I had kept my promise. We moved slowly through the gifts, each one a small celebration. I smiled as she hugged me after opening a sketchbook, her arms warm and strong around my shoulders. The exhaustion from the night still clung to me. But being here, being present, was a kind of healing I hadn't realized I needed. And then, in the simple chaos of crumpled wrapping paper and ribbons, it happened. My daughter reached under the couch to gather a stray bow, and her hand closed around something else. She pulled it out, frowning. A folded piece of paper, creased and cold. My breath caught. The termination notice. I must have dropped it sometime in the early hours, when I was too numb to think clearly, and now it was in her hands. The black letters stark against the white page. "Mom," she asked softly, her eyes scanning the top line. Termination notice effective immediately. Her voice trembled as she looked up. "Mom, are you in trouble?" The words pierced me deeper than the letter itself ever had. For a heartbeat, I couldn't answer. Shame washed through me, shame for what they had done, shame for letting her glimpse the cruelty I had tried to shield her from. I reached for her hand, covering the paper gently. "No," I whispered, steadying my voice even as my chest ached. "Not trouble. Not anymore." She studied my face. Still holding the letter, I could see the questions in her eyes, the worry that maybe her mother was broken in ways she couldn't fix, but I also saw something else: trust. She was waiting for me to tell her the truth she could carry without fear. "They thought they could take everything from me," I said softly, meeting her gaze. "But they can't take this. They can't take you. They can't take today." Her lip trembled, and then she leaned forward, pressing herself into my arms. I held her tightly, the paper crumpling between us, and for the first time since midnight, the weight lifted. I didn't have to hide anymore. The truth was out there already, circling boardrooms, splashed across headlines. And here, with her, it didn't matter. The company had been ruthless. Yes, they had chosen the cruelest moment, the sharpest blade. But even in their cruelty, they had given me something unexpected. Freedom. I pulled back just enough to look at her again. "I kept my promise," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." She nodded, her eyes wide. And then, with a small smile, She pushed the letter aside and reached for her next gift. The heaviness in my chest eased as she laughed again, the sound filling the room. Pain and pride mixed inside me. Pain for the years I had lost to people who never valued me. Pride for this moment that no one could take away. As she ripped open another package, I leaned back against the couch, closing my eyes briefly. The storm beyond our door would continue. Contracts unraveling, reputations collapsing. But here, under the tree, in the glow of her laughter, I had already won, for the first time in 18 years. I felt truly free. By the time noon arrived, the world was no longer whispering about what had happened. It was shouting. Headlines filled every feed. Investors voiced outrage, and the company scrambled to contain what could no longer be controlled. Then came the line that sealed his downfall. At an emergency press conference, my former CEO, pale and hollow-eyed, let slip the words that spread like wildfire. How could this collapse overnight? It wasn't just a question, it was a confession, a cry of helplessness that carried across every major outlet. Watching the clip, I felt an almost surreal calm. The man who had humiliated me at 11:58 p.m. now stood before the world, humiliated himself. Undone not by chance, but by the arrogance that blinded him. The fallout grew sharper within the hour. Zurich froze commitments. Tokyo retracted guarantees. And Dubai issued a final statement: the contract would not be revisited under existing leadership. And then, the twist that turned their humiliation into my vindication, the partners issued a joint declaration. We will only resume negotiations under the condition that Denise Scott serves as independent advisor of record. I read it twice, hands trembling. For a moment, I thought it was a cruel joke, some planted rumor, but confirmations followed: emails, calls, even a message from Ingrid herself. It was real. They had tied the company's survival to me. I should have felt triumphant. And, in part, I did. There was satisfaction in knowing the people who discarded me now needed me more than air. But there was also clarity, because I had not fought all night, had not endured that midnight blow, just to crawl back into the same cage. The board tried. Of course, calls came, each one more desperate than the last. They pleaded, they bargained, some even begged, just come back, save the contract. It's not too late. When my turn came to speak, I answered plainly, voice steady, as though the weight of 18 years had already lifted from me. I promised my daughter I'd be here on Christmas morning. I said, I won't break that promise for you now. The silence on the other end stretched long, brittle, final. I ended the call before they could reply. That was the emotional pivot I hadn't expected. Not revenge, not rage, but liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't tethered to their schedules, their cruelty, their endless hunger. My worth was no longer something they could define. The conflict still tugged at me. Of course, 18 years is not erased in a day. There was pain in remembering the sacrifices, the loyalty, the moments I believed I belonged there, but standing at this crossroads, with my daughter's laughter drifting in from the kitchen, I realized I didn't need them anymore. They were the ones bleeding, scrambling, choking on their own arrogance, and I was free. That afternoon, I drafted my own announcement, not under their letterhead, but under my own name. A quiet message to the international partners, thanking them for their trust, confirming my willingness to serve as an independent advisor, not for the company that discarded me, but for the future I would chart myself. When I hit send, a rush of relief surged through me. It wasn't just a career decision, it was a reclamation of dignity. A declaration that I would never again let anyone else hold the pen that wrote my worth. The company continued to stumble, its empire crumbling in public view. Their press releases grew shorter, their denials weaker, and that CEO's desperate cry, "How could this collapse overnight?" echoed as both epitaph and warning. I sat by the tree one last time that day. My daughter curled beside me, her head against my shoulder. The paper scraps of Christmas morning still littered the floor. A reminder of promises kept. 18 years they had taken from me, in one night. I took back my name, sometimes. The greatest victories aren't about going back, they're about walking forward under your own name. If this story spoke to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your feelings in the comments. Tap like if it resonated. And subscribe so you don't miss more stories of resilience and quiet justice.